Jaehaerys and Alysanne seem to be the perfect match, an example of what a king and queen should be and how a stable and loving marriage can bring peace and prosperity to a kingdom. But is this really the case? Marriage, especially for kings and lords in Westeros, more often than not is an exercise of politics rather than one of love. This reflects the reality of real-world history, where in the medieval world, you married to secure alliances or to gain power, or in some cases, as part of a peace agreement after a war. As a king, it would be your responsibility to marry a woman who would be a good queen and provide heirs. You, male or female, more often than not, married who your father told you to, whether you like that person or not. So both in Westeros and the real world, marrying for love was an extremely rare occurrence. Now, in early Targaryen history, there seems to be two cases of kings marrying for love, or so it would seem on the surface. If you read between the lines of Fire and Blood, the source for all this information, and keep in mind the idea it could be coming from an unreliable narrator or biased source, these marriages of love may not be all they seem. The first obvious case of this before the time of Jaehaerys would be the marriage of his grandfather, Aegon the Conqueror, and his grandmother, Rhaenys Targaryen. Aegon did marry both of his sisters, and it's frequently stated he married the elder sister, Visenya, for duty, but his younger, Rhaenys, for love. The idea of him marrying Rhaenys for love is supported by how the two acted around each other, with it being commonly known that for every night he spent with Visenya, Aegon would spend 10 with Rhaenys. So I would say there is enough evidence to say Aegon did marry one of his sisters at least for love. But there are two caveats to this idea. Firstly, that he still did his duty and married his elder sister Visenya. Secondly, by marrying Rhaenys as well, Aegon would be keeping the power of House Targaryen with House Targaryen. Say for instance, he does not marry one of his sisters. That sister would then be free to marry another lord. Now, with no other Targaryens at the time, this would mean a lord outside of House Targaryen. With that sister marrying outside the house, she would take some of the Targaryen power with her, passing it to another house via her children. It is also very possible that this could result in another Westerosi house having access to dragons, not only making Aegon's conquest harder, but making it harder to consolidate his rule. In fact, in a way, this exact thing is what caused the Dance of Dragons and resulted in House Velaryon having dragon riders. So how does this relate to Jaehaerys and Alysanne? Well, there are a lot of parallels with the situation with Aegon, albeit during a more difficult time politically for House Targaryen. When Jaehaerys took the throne in 48 AC at the age of 14, Westeros had been under the bloody rule of his uncle, Maegor the Cruel, as well as fighting a bloody civil war against the faith. He not only had risen up against Maegor, but also Aenys, Jaehaerys' father, in the years prior to Maegor's rule, for marrying Jaehaerys' elder sister Rhaena till their brother Aegon, the Uncrowned, who was later killed by Maegor. Now, when Jaehaerys came to power, the man who facilitated his ascent to the throne was Rhaegar Baratheon, who would act as Lord Protector of the realm until Jaehaerys came of age. The impression you get of Rhaegar in Fire and Blood is he's a very strong-willed man. Fire and Blood seems to paint him as sort of power-hungry, and alongside Jaehaerys' mother had a very clear idea of what they wanted Jaehaerys to be, and the role Rhaegar had to play in politics during the years to come. Some put forward that Rhaegar marrying Queen Alyssa was part of both of them trying to consolidate their own power and position. Something that needs to be pointed out in defense of Rhaegar's actions, especially his pseudo-attempted coup, is that the rule of Maegor and the Faith Uprising damaged Westeros and its people greatly. It's fair to say that Rhaegar and many of his small council wanted to avoid the same again by any cost, very much fearing another Faith Uprising, but they did this at the cost of undermining the crown and ultimately giving themselves power. Now, the story we get from Fire and Blood is that Rhaegar and the small council wanted to arrange a marriage between Jaehaerys and the daughter of the Archon of Tyrosh, and for Princess Alysanne to marry Rhaegar's youngest brother. Although the council had not told Alysanne of the betrothal, she soon found out, and Rhaegar would suspect her uncle Daemon as the informer, which I think is a very likely series of events. But, under the cover of darkness, Jaehaerys and Alysanne snuck away to Dragonstone with their dragons and Kingsguard, where they married in secret. Jaehaerys would refuse to consummate the marriage, as he believed Alysanne was still too young. Rhaegar and Alyssa soon arrived after the wedding, and upon learning of the marriage had not yet been consummated, Rhaegar declared they were not married and ordered his men to secure the royal children. But the Kingsguard defied the king's hand, forming a wall in front of the king and queen, informing Rhaegar that he would be the first to die if his men would attack them. Queen Alyssa convinced her husband to return to King's Landing, whilst Jaehaerys and Alysanne remained behind, where they would spend the rest of the king's minority at Dragonstone. No announcement about the king's marriage was made to the realm. Lord Rhaegar ordered everyone who accompanied him to Dragonstone to keep silent about the king's marriage, while Grand Maester Bennifer burned the letters sent to Matthias attempted to send to the High Septon on orders of Rogar. Neither did Jaehaerys announce his marriage to the realm, although he easily could have done so, knowing it would have to be carefully handled, and with Rogar still holding out some hope he could undo it with plots such as the use of Corian Weil. Now, Jaehaerys running away to Dragonstone and marrying his sister really is the boy king trying to stamp his authority on a situation where he maybe felt like he was being cut out and the power of the crown eroded. His defiance during the confrontation at the gates of Dragonstone is him really stamping down his authority, transforming himself from the teenage boy into a king. It put Rogar and his small council in their place, albeit for a while. Fire and Blood paints a picture that Jaehaerys and Alysanne ran away and married because of their love for one another. But when you really read it with an open mind, there is really very little evidence to support that claim. The picture is painted by the fact that Jaehaerys and Alysanne repeatedly state their love for one another, as well as the people who surround them talking about how in love they were. Now, this may very well have been the case. They may well have been deeply in love, but like we were talking about at the start of the video, in a medieval society, people did not marry for love. People did their duty, whether you were a king or a small lord. That is why I think there's more to Jaehaerys' motivation to marry Alysanne than meets the eye. Yes, love may have been a factor, and if you want my honest opinion, I do actually think it was. But this match was just as political as it was for love. This match was still a bold move by Jaehaerys in the Game of Thrones. Jaehaerys knew if he did not marry Alysanne, then Rogar would marry her to another lord, most likely one of his younger brothers, thus giving House Baratheon potential dragon riders, reducing the power of the crown, and maybe even causing instability and conflict, like that scene in the Dance of Dragons. Jaehaerys marrying his sister, be it for love or not, was a smart political move in order to protect the power of the crown. He knew the value of marriage, and he knew the role Alysanne would play politically. Even so, it was a very bold move by a young king that stamped his authority and made people pay attention. The match came with risk, but calculated ones. There was a real risk of another faith revolt, but even so, Jaehaerys had a plan to circumvent the issue with the doctrine of exemptionalism. This is where Jaehaerys ultimately defeated Rogar, by having a solution to the issue presented by the faith, taking away any justification Rogar Baratheon had to oppose the match. This moment, for me, Jaehaerys defeating Rogar in such a way at such a young age, is what allowed him to become the kind of king he did. Now we've broken it down, it's plain to see how Jaehaerys' choice to marry his sister was a vital political move, which in turn does make their marriage a political one. However, the narrative from Fire and Blood that they married for love can't be ignored either. I do believe this is one of these very few cases where political matches and matches for love collide. My perspective is Jaehaerys and Alysanne did have a loving and good relationship, even if it's not the idealistic one painted in Fire and Blood. It's hard to maintain such a long marriage with so much hardship without the basis of love between them. There'll be a video coming out soon where I really break it down and analyse the relationship and give a closer look at the narrative of Fire and Blood. It's sort of a follow-up to this video, so keep an eye out for that soon. But in conclusion, did Jaehaerys marry for love? Probably yes, but that doesn't also mean that his marriage wasn't a political one.